Okay, and we're back again with Patrik Os, and this time we are talking about a video. Watch Voddie Baucham reaction when asked a racist question, and we will link to that in the description. So, Patrik, welcome again.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
So, who is Voddie Baucham?
Sure. Voddie Baucham is he's a Reformed Baptist. He's got a doctorate. He's Dr. Voddie Baucham. We should be more respectful.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find him on the speaking circuit amongst Reformed groups year round. He's always at the big ones. Later this month, the G3 conference is coming up, and that is where the video we're reacting to was originally recorded. It was G3 2013, so they have him back, it seems, every year.
Yeah, and there's quite a bit to say about Voddie Baucham, and I don't think we're going to cover it all today, but there's a lot of issues we could get into if we wanted to about why is this man such a prominent speaker. And I've heard other Kenneths talk about how he doesn't really say anything different than what other people are already saying, but because he's black, he is put in a prominent role, and that all could be debated, but we're talking here about specifically what he said in this particular conference, question and answer. So here we see. Actually, I guess I'll say a little bit more about Voddie Baucham from my experience. We've been homeschooling parents for many years, so we are very familiar with him. We have a video of Voddie Baucham called "Children of Caesar," which he speaks against public schooling. It's actually a really good video. So this is not a bash Voddie Baucham session. I think there's a lot of positive things about him, and as you do as well. But the unnecessary over attention that homeschooling parents have given him, at least where I'm at in Ohio, it's very significant. So around the beginning, we see the question posed to Voddie Baucham by one of his own people.
Dr. Baucham, the next question comes to you, and it's this. As an African American, how do I encourage other African American Christians to consider Reformed theology and other deeper things of God instead of being caught up in the emotionalism of Pentecostalism and word faith theology?
And so he gives a very interesting response. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, the whole response I think is interesting. I mean, it's about a 7-minute response he gives to this. He goes in a couple of different places. But the line that I found most striking initially is,
all of us have a passion for people who are like us. All of us. And that's okay, because the Apostle Paul was the same way. I mean, we have that from him in Romans. He had a special passion for people who are like him, and a special desire to see his kinsmen according to the flesh to come to know God and to serve God, and there's nothing wrong with that.
And you know, I couldn't say it any better myself, right? I think you'd probably agree, Hans, that there's nothing wrong with having a particular love for your kinsmen. And that's where he starts, and I think that's a great thing to affirm to this kinsman of his in the audience, presumably. But it is what starts to get a little concerning is when he later says, well, he basically takes all of that whole couple of sentences and just tosses it away. Just chucks it right in the trash when he says things like, we're called to make the gospel clear for all people, which isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, everyone would agree that we should be making the gospel clear to all people, but we're not all called. I mean, some people are called to a specific mission field.
Right. And didn't he even say that? I mean, that's what I thought was weird. He contradicts his previous statement. He said Paul had a specific mission to the Gentiles, but then he says, then he basically tells us our mission is to just indiscriminately preach the gospel to anyone and everyone.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a very odd thing for him to say, because I mean, he mentions a couple of countries in Africa at one point, and those are countries where you can find some pretty strong missions works going on, organized missions around preaching to a specific people in a specific place and trying to get them to know God. And, oftentimes those are places that haven't gotten a lot of attention in prior centuries, so we're playing some catch-up. But should those missionaries who are devoting their lives to those people in, say, Zambia, should they just stop what they're doing and just preach around their own neighborhood? I mean, it'd be easier, who wouldn't rather preach in the suburbs than in Africa? But we're not all called to the same mission fields.
Yeah, so what we have is he basically cannot, and I think that is true of anyone who calls themselves an anti-racist, is that they cannot be consistent in what they say they believe and what they actually practice, because you have him saying there's nothing wrong with having a special love for your own kinsman according to the flesh, but now around the 345 mark, they're no longer kinsmen according to the flesh. It's just skin color or levels of melanin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about people with more melanin versus less melanin. And how do you communicate to a person with more melanin? The amount of melanin in your skin does not determine how you hear the gospel.
And, I mean, in a certain sense, he's not wrong, right? I mean, if I go out and get a tan, I'm not going to hear the gospel differently. But if I go to Gambia, they are going to hear the gospel differently. Not only do they have different cultures, but they also have different language. I can't just assume that I can start preaching to them out of my King James Version Bible and that they'll understand what's going on. I need to talk to them where they are, how they can understand.
So perhaps Voddie believes that because blacks and whites are both in America in supposedly the same culture, they should be ministered to the exact same way.
He must believe that, but even that I would find odd. I deal with various kinds of people every day throughout all of my life. I have, and I don't deal with different kinds of people the same way. They have different expectations. That they communicate in different fashions. Some are more formal, some are less. I mean, these are all of the kinds of things that you need to take into account, especially when you're trying to preach the gospel. There are people who, they want, charts and graphs. They need theology explained to them, in the most complicated fashion possible, right? And then there are other people who, there's a reason why Pentecostalism, the charismatic movement has gone so far. It's, for some people, emotions is how you communicate best to them. Excuse me. And if we're ignoring that, then we're not going to reach them.
Here's a comment from the YouTube video. Christy Arnold. She says, overreaction. Lost some of my respect for him. The point is that lots of African Americans are into Pentecostal type churches. It's a cultural reality. It's not meant to be an offense. It's like, get over it. We should be able to talk about our cultural realities. So even someone, and probably almost everyone commenting on this, would cringe at the idea that that a lot of the ideas that we put forth, right? But at the same time, they can recognize that there are tendencies that we all have as people groups. I mean, everyone will admit that certain families can have tendencies toward alcoholism, and it could go back many generations. But then when it comes to whole people groups as a race, suddenly that rule no longer applies. And I think there actually are a lot of people like this Christy Arnold here that can see and admit the honest truth about that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because her comment certainly jumped out at me, and there were a few others that did as well. I'll go through them real quick. One from Ante Thompson. He asked you a simple question of how to serve African Americans, and you punished him with this answer. You assumed he only ministers to Africans when he only asked how to make it clear to them. That does not then, by default, mean he does not minister to other nationalities. He may do that on the regular, but he needed help in that area, and you danced around the question and catered to your peers. And there's another guy who says basically the same thing. And yeah, I mean, that's what's most frustrating. I mean, look, whatever Voddie's answer might have been to how to minister to charismatic Black, I would have been interested. I don't know too many personally. However, I do have family who's into the charismatic movement, and I would have appreciated an actual answer. It might not have helped me specifically, but it would have been nice to have heard something instead of this odd diatribe that he goes on about melanin, which is bizarre.
So conclusively, I don't know if there's any statistical, like, absolute evidence, but are Black people more prone to these type of churches? And Voddie is simply trying to make it out like everyone, I recall him in the answer saying, oh, everybody basically has the same problems. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. And then he would make a statement like, because every single Black person isn't like that, we can't make a general statement. And that's a lot of people that oppose us. They'll use that as the basis of their argument, that because it doesn't apply to every single person, therefore you can't say it and make a general statement about a general truth.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that's it's an odd statement, right? Because I mean they're on the surface they're saying that of course we behave different from other people as individuals, and that's true. But when many people start behaving in the same way as individuals, they refuse to ask whether or not there's something that connects those people that are making those same kinds of choices. And yeah, I mean, you can, if half of one group is behaving in exactly the same way and the other half is kind of all over the map, that doesn't mean that the first half isn't something that we can look to determine things about them. It might just mean that second half of the group, which is, there aren't as many broad trends to look at, they might just be more difficult to work with. But in the case of Blacks potentially having or really having a predisposition towards more emotional styles of worship, instead of leaving that in the hands of people who are going to take advantage of them, I mean, we should really be asking, how can we point that in a direction that glorifies God? And I mean, again, that's something that Voddie doesn't seem to want to discuss. He doesn't want to talk about this as an issue. It doesn't even sound like he wants to determine whether or not it's true, right? He doesn't question whether or not it's true during his answer. He just wants to dance around it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because the differences in the worship style of blacks is not necessarily a negative thing. They are different, and they can glorify God in a way that's different than white people can, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, this is I mean, to me, this is one of the things that's most irritating when you try to talk about these issues with people, that they would assume that because we're pointing out these trends that are different, that we mean that they're negative in some fashion. But you know, you can rely on you know, I mean, as long as we're talking about stereotypes, right? You can rely on those little old black church ladies to have a serious fear of the devil. And that's something that I think whites could learn from, frankly, is that, yes, he is a real force in the world trying to corrupt our youth. And how many, you know, how many white people don't take that as a serious threat? Like, you know, let's learn from each other, and also let's find ways to worship God rightly that glorify him, right? You know, we don't need to seek after babbling or anything, but you know, I don't recall any passages in scripture that say you can't be exuberant in worship. I think mostly they call for it, in fact.
Yeah, and that, I think that's part of a very beautiful checks and balances system God has when he created the races. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and we can learn from one another. But if you mix everyone together, you will lose that beautiful system of checks and balances.
Yeah, amen.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
You know, I think we've probably about covered it all. I guess I'd reiterate what you said at the beginning. I think Voddie, on the whole, is a lot better than some others you'll find on the speaking circuit. You know, he does seem to be a positive influence for Christianity worldwide. It's just a shame that he's not willing to, you know, to help his own kinsmen talk to his kinsmen. It's really troubling. But other than that, no, I'm happy that he's out there doing his thing.
Yeah, I'm into that. I remember watching a video a few years ago where he was taking on someone in, I think it was on like CNN or something, and he was taking them on regarding the issue of sodomy. And a lot of times, you know, you'll see the white pastors afraid to stand up on that type of issue, but he was not afraid to do so. And, you know, you gotta give him credit for that. So a lot of positive things, but definitely dead wrong on the topic that he gave the answer on. So well, thanks for doing this show with me again. Thanks for your input, and we will wrap up here, and we'll come back again hopefully soon with another topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's been a pleasure.
Sure. All right. We'll talk to you later.